Okay. Well, welcome to our Friday edition, our Friday stream video on Revelation. And let's start the share. And we're here with Dr. Everett Ramsey and Dr. Ewing.
Yes.
So, there you go. That's better. Okay. So we're going to start a share with our document, which is Revelation Stream 2021. And this is February 26, 2021. So today I've made a little update here. I've added some new links at the top and I've added a playlist for our videos, which is on God's Covenant People. So, and there's the link to the channel. And we're on stream 8, 7, 8. There you go. Start stream 8. And so we ended basically right here at the, by the way, sorry. Okay. I was talking about we're changing the context of when we take Christ out of the picture here in Genesis because of the way we're teaching it. We take the realization that it was Abraham's family that were promised Christ from the beginning by the way we teach, starting with Genesis chapter 12 and the Abrahamic covenant. His responsibility was to pass this teaching of Christ, the Redeemer, onto his children. That's what it's really about. It says then when we teach it differently, like we ended with, you're taking redemption out of the picture until the renewed testament, which actually the context mentioned back in Genesis 15:1. 18:19 is the verse that gives us the context. For I know him, Abraham, in other words, that he will command his children after him, his posterity, and they shall keep the way, which means follow God's law and teach the message of Christ. The way is what we were told in the New Testament was what these Christian Israelites were teaching was about Christ, right? That was called the way. And here he mentions it here. It's the way of the Lord or Yahweh to do justice and judgment, which is what he gave us in Exodus chapter 18. Just before he gave us the law, he basically gave us a layout of how we do our justice system. And that was before he wrote the law down, but we already had the law because that was we mentioned last week, it was in Genesis 26:5. Abraham followed the law. So that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him, which means that it's still conditional that he follows justice and judgment until the Abrahamic covenant becomes unconditional, which I said was when he offered Isaac. So we covered that last week. So in stream 8, then, I'm saying I'm estimating 90%. It may not be that much, but there's a lot of people that are going to blindly support the beast, and we covered that because there's all these people who already changed their DNA. Maybe some of them didn't know that, but it was advertised that this VMAX that everybody was taking changed their DNA. It's just it's on TV. Maybe they didn't notice it, but whatever. I'm saying that that's going to make a lot of people that are now transhuman who are going to blindly support the beast because they can't go backwards and become human again. So, at any rate, that's my logic. So, the question is where did Abraham learn this justice and judgment that he could teach it? You have to know it to teach it. So, it's not until Genesis 26:5 that Yahweh himself is telling Isaac that Abraham obeyed my voice. So he basically did what he was told, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So in other words, he followed God's law. He taught the message of Christ to his posterity and to his household, which is important. We don't always cover that there was probably at least 1,000 people in his household who were following him around And we're going to look at that because that's the beginning there where I think Abraham had the power with God. That's where it starts, but we kind of just skip over a lot of the stuff in Genesis and don't now necessarily teach that. But it starts in chapter 12. We're going to look at that today because that'll set the stage for everything up through the end of Genesis. So Isaac was taught the message of Christ from Abraham, which got it from Christ or Yahweh. Isaac has power with God because that's Yahweh speaking to him. So you have power with God when God comes and speaks to you and tells you what to do and that kind of thing. That's where the power with God comes from. In other words, He recognizes you. He doesn't recognize other people, and He acts for you as Christ, the rock, and the shield, and so forth. So and he's confirming in that verse that he should follow in his father's footsteps to be blessed. There's another place where we can make some logical connections to Abraham following God's law and having power with God, and that's in Genesis chapter 13 and 14. Actually, I should have just said 12. That's where it starts. Hey, I forgot that I can actually change that now. Yeah, I wanted to do this differently so I could make edits or instead of just looking at the PDFs. That's why we're doing
Yeah.
it today. Okay, so we should notice in 12:7 the fact that Yahweh made a promise or a prophecy then to Abraham to give the land where he was standing to his posterity. Now we're going to look at some of this today. And I looked through my Ferrari because it always tends to give us some different ideas. But I'm going to quote some things starting from Genesis chapter 12. That's what we're going to do today. So in 12:7, it's where he tells Abraham that he's going to give this land, and this land is I looked it up, ALON dash that should be Moriah maybe, Moreh.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah,
land of
maybe.
Moriah. I think it's Moriah because there is a mountain, Mount Moriah, which
Right.
when you compare, there's and I probably didn't talk to you much about this, but I do have it is in this writing of God and some of this other stuff about this other PhD, and I added them to the well. I don't want to switch over there. At any rate, I've added them to my front of my website yesterday,
Mm.
and he has a book. He's done a lot of what do you call that? Forensic, uh,
Exploration
where he works on. Oh, what's the word? Jeez, every time I try to say something, that's exactly when I forget what I'm trying to say. I know exactly.
join the crowd.
It's no, it's places. Uh, land and locations and
Oh, okay.
what do you call?
Archaeology.
Well, not archaeology, but physical locations. Geology. Well, not
Okay.
geology, but locations. Where places are. Geography. Yeah, yeah, geography. So he's a forensic, uh, geographic, whatever you call it. At any rate, so
Okay.
he knows he's looked into where all these places are. Now, the problem we've got here is we've already started out talking about the fact that we didn't know where Sinai was. So all these places we have in our Bibles now, these charts and these locations and the images of, geographic images of where everything is that's mentioned in the Bible is wrong because all of that stuff is all based on Mount Sinai being over in the Sinai Peninsula. But
Yeah.
now we know it's not in the Sinai Peninsula. So what happened is all these place names that's mentioned in the Bible they people just figured out well where it should be, and then they labeled a place. And you've got this David Roll who has worked on this Red Sea miracle and so forth, who's helped lay out where places should be. And this whole reason where they didn't think that Mount Sinai was over in Saudi Arabia was based on the fact that they had these place names of where they traveled in the Exodus, all placed over into the Sinai Peninsula. So then They laid everything out about the Exodus based on that, which put the Exodus way over in uh, the Suez Canal area. You see,
Right.
actually, they were crossing over the Gulf of Aqaba. Everything that's in your Bible right now is based on passing over some body of water over around the Suez Canal. So David Roll has done a lot of work on this, which now has moved the realization. Of course, him and Glenn Fritz is the other PhD. So they've done a lot of work on this to show that no, actually, they passed over at the Gulf of Aqaba at Nuweiba Beach, is where they want to cross. And that puts Mount Sinai over in Saudi Arabia in the land of Midian, which is what the Bible actually says, because no one's going to place the land of Midian over in this Sinai Peninsula. You see what I'm saying? No one's going
Right.
to do that.
Yeah.
They
Hmm.
all admit that Midian is over in Saudi Arabia, and they should know then that Moses came from Midian, from the southeast part of Midian, in other words, where he was at the burning bush, which is actually at Mount Sinai. So they should all know that, but they don't agree that that's where it is, and they haven't, because in the last 2,000 years, starting with Constantine, he put it over there, and I don't necessarily know why he did put it there, but at any rate, they put him, just recognized a mountain, and now that's been the fake Mount Sinai for the last 2,000 years. And all the archaeology, everything that's been done up to that point has been based on the mountain being there, which is why no one agrees that it's there, because it's obviously not Mount Sinai. So that's really messed up the last 2,000 years of history. Now we can correct it, and people are correcting it, but it's going to be, might be another 2,000 years before scholars admit that they're right, you see. But this goes back to what's mentioned here in Genesis about where Abraham is. You see, I think if you look at what's being said and remember now that Sinai is over there in what we call Saudi Arabia, and you just say, okay, this is where it is. Now, and you read Genesis chapter 12 again, the places mentioned here are not where they are in your Bible in the maps that have been there for however long. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not the same place. Those places' names were just made up to fit the day when all this was written and put together and then taught. And it's been wrong, in other words, for however long it's been taught, which is probably at least 1500, 1700, something in that range.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's been wrong at least that long, the places that's mentioned here in Scripture. So let's just keep that in mind. Now, let's go back and look at Genesis 12, 13, and 14. So this prophecy, Abraham was given the land where he was standing to his posterity. Okay. And this place is described as the plain of Moriah, an area with Bethel on the west. Now, you remember Bethel is where the Jacob's vision of the ladder to heaven was.
Right.
And that was originally called Luz, and then he was laying on a rock and he consecrated the rock and called the rock Bethel, but he also changed the name of where he was laying to Bethel,
Hmm.
originally called Luz. Now, this was also supposedly the holy mountain where he was laying. If you read through all the scripture, that apparently is where he was.
Hmm.
And here in Genesis chapter 12, Abraham built an altar there and called on Yahovah. So he was led. It starts in Genesis 12:1 that he's going to lead him to this land. Then in 12:7, he's standing there and he says he's going to give him this land. Okay, and this is he just went over the apparently the holy mountain, which we call Mount Sinai, and built this altar on the east side. And he's asking Christ then for instruction on where he's supposed to go. Now, he might not have known that Mount Sinai was the holy mountain, possibly he didn't know that. But Christ had told him to go where he would instruct him to go. That's what he told him. Now, that's in 12:1. So I think Christ then would instruct him to go to this holy mountain first. And here's why I think that. It says he pitched his tent on the east of Bethel, so that would be the east side of Mount Sinai, if you go by what I'm saying. Then he went further south, which would be into deeper into the land of Midian. Possibly the land of Midian, at least where we have it located today, goes up to all the way up to where the Edomites would have been, which would be north
Mm.
of Mount Sinai. However, if you look on the older maps, it goes way down south, at least a couple hundred miles or more south, or south southeast, down the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you'll notice, your old maps show it down there,
Yeah.
south of Mount Sinai. But it could go north as high as the bottom part of Lebanon, so which would be the north part of Saudi Arabia. Okay. So he pitched his tent, and then he went further south. So my logic is that Luz equals Bethel. In other words, change that, which means the house of God, which makes the holy mountain make sense, right? If that's the correct spot. It's also mentioned here as Mount Moriah, so that could be apparently the same location. And I get that. I think it's Glenn Fritz that says yes, those two places should be the same place. Well, Mount Oreb is also mentioned. Oh, and Mount Paran. That's what I forgot. Mount Paran. You'll notice that Mount Paran is also mentioned in with where Mount Sinai should be, as if there's a plain of Paran, in other words, which should be
Mm.
right there in the area of Mount Sinai. And it's just used as basically the same location. It might be a few miles off, but basically it's the same location. You understand?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
Mount Horeb is actually on the north side of where Mount Sinai, or it's called the Mountain of Almonds, if you're looking on Google.
Mm.
But Mount Oreb is a different peak, and it has the Rock of Oreb on the northwest corner. If you look at the maps, okay, so that's the area, but it's all the same places. Now, I propose then, if he was at Mount Sinai, he went south into Midian or further into Midian. In 12:5 and 12:16, it says Abraham had many servants, male and female. Then in 14:14, it indicates Abraham had 318 trained servants in arms or with arms, born in his own house, which is what it says. So he had a household of 318 men old enough to fight. So if you
Mm.
figure each had two parents, of course, some of them might have had multiple sons, for example. It
Right.
makes for a good estimate of approximately 1,000 people total in his household, and that's a small town and a lot of people to feed on the road. And a lot of water, obviously, because you got to
Mm-hmm.
realize what Saudi Arabia looks like when you're standing there. There's plenty of video of Mount Sinai. It's all just rocks and dirt. Not much growing there.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it gets over 100 degrees during the day. So, it probably need a lot of water. And he's traveling around with all these people, which is could be a good 1,000 people. So, small town in Missouri. So, based on what story we're given about his trip to Pharaoh's house in 1215, we could reason that the cattle, silver, and gold it says he had or was given in 13:2 was given to him by the Pharaoh, who it says was plagued in 1217 by Jehovah, which is Christ the Rock, when he kills people, plagues people, and brings things on. That's Christ the Rock because of Sarah, is what it says. And this story parallels pretty much exactly what we read up in chapter 20, uh, if you'll recall that story up there. So, and we're going to be there next video or two. So, keep in mind, you'll notice that Sarah is 65 here in 12:4. Most people might not have noticed that, but you're reading this here in chapter 12, it appears men have quite a desire for her company here in chapter 12. Consider that Abraham is concerned people will kill him for her. That's what he says in 12:12. Then in 12:19, this Pharaoh in Egypt, where they go to, admits that he might have married her. So at age 65, he's says, well, he might have married her. And to what? To have children, maybe? Doesn't that kind of sound like what we read in chapter 20? Same idea. So is she just that good looking that, that he wants her around? Or, is that what he's thinking? She's 65.
Yeah.
Abraham is 75. I'm just saying, we don't always bring that out, but you got to think about that. So what's he thinking? He wants to marry her at 65. You see what I'm saying? Is she just
Mm.
really that good looking? So Abraham has power with God because Christ is shielding him from harm because he plagued the Pharaoh, you see,
Yeah.
to protect him, to protect Abraham. And then is when you see that the Pharaoh realizes that because he has her, if you recall, tell Pharaoh that he is her brother, and then Pharaoh, in other words, wants to add her to his harem, and then right after that, well, he plagues Pharaoh, which is the same thing he did to Abimelech up in chapter 20, and basically tells him don't touch her because she's married to Abraham. And then he gets mad and sends Abraham away with all these cattle, these sheep and goats, and all this huge amounts of stuff. And remember, Lot is also with him, and these 1,000 people in his household are all with him. Gives him all these things and sends him away and gives him silver and gold, large amounts of silver and gold to get rid of them, basically. In a sense, same thing Abimelech did. Exact same thing if you read that and compare the two. So Yahovah is fighting for him as the rock. He plagued him in 12:17, and then he's blessing him in 13:2 with the cattle, the silver, the gold. And it mentions about 6 or 7 different things. But I'm
Mm.
just trying to make a point here. So maybe it's just me, but I think Abraham and his household were driven out of Midian. Remember, they were at this altar originally, which I'm proposing was in Bethel, which was probably just there on the east side. It says it actually mentions some plain of high Haai, I believe is the way it's written. I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
AI. Huh?
AI, yeah, okay.
Mm.
So that's where it says he actually is, and that's where he builds his altar, but it's on the east side
Right.
of what should be Mount Sinai. But then he goes south into Midian, and then he's instructed to go to Egypt by Yahovah. So now he's coming back from Egypt, and where does he go? He goes back to the plain where he was originally, and it says by the way of the south. So, in other words, we know where Egypt is, right? And then we know the
Mm.
Sinai Peninsula is in the middle, which is that big V, and then he has to go south if he's going into Saudi Arabia, where Mount Sinai is, back to this plain, and this plain is just to in other words, which would be the southeast from that corner, that top corner of the Gulf of Aqaba.
Mm.
So that's where he has to go south, and that's what it says. Go south. So I'm just saying that would match if that's where it is. Sarah, which of course is Sarah, was such a vision then, even at her age, that you could just guess what was going to happen when she got to Egypt with Abraham. That's why he said they're going to kill me if they see you. You see,
Mm.
so Yahweh didn't really need to set that up to blessing. All he really had to do was plague the Pharaoh, and then the Pharaoh wanted them to leave, and their whole 1,000 people in their household. It says now she was fair, that's 12:11, and obviously beautiful. Otherwise, these men wouldn't have bothered to tell the Pharaoh about her. So, because obviously, why would he want a 65-year-old woman as a wife unless she was some type of absolute beauty to look at? So, I think Christ intended all this to profit Abraham and Sarah, and he made it happen. He told them to go there, right?
Mm.
And so I'm just looking at what Christ did and then what happened, in other words. So what happened next? Think about the order of events. And 12:1 tells them to go to the land he'll lead them to. 12:7, Christ appears to him. Abraham builds an altar east of Sinai, if I'm correct. Then he goes south to Midian. Then Christ's reply to, in other words, this great blessing leading him to this land, which is now he's in Midian, is that there's a great famine in the land, so grievous that they had to leave. So he just gets there, and then there's a famine, and then he has to leave, and he tells them to go to Egypt. So I assume then he's still being led around by Christ because he told him to go on this long vacation back to Egypt. So that's a long walk from where they would have been, in other words, south down in Midian, all the way back over to Egypt. That's a pretty good walk.
Yeah.
So this turns into a huge blessing, though, as he wins basically the Publisher Clearinghouse lottery, is what it seems like, right? Because you'll notice what happens next. So then when he goes back to where he started, to this altar east of Sinai, so he just went into a big circle, basically. Let's just say it that way. And then if you continue reading on in chapter 13, we see he had his Lot, his nephew, with him. So they both had herdsmen and many cattle and asses and so on, other types of animals, goats and so forth. So then there was these contentions between them that Abraham and Lot, in other words, that prompted Abraham to suggest that they split up. So Lot went to the plains of Jordan, which was Sodom and Gomorrah. We know where that is actually, which would be northeast then from Mount Sinai, or probably just basically north.
Yeah.
This land of Canaan comment, though, now here's the problem. It says there's people of Canaan in the land. Okay, and that came from 12:5, 13:7, and 13:13. But actually, Abraham was taken there by Jehovah in 12:1, you see, and told he would possess the land. So that doesn't make it the land of Canaan just because there's Canaanites there, right?
Uh,
See,
that's
they
true.
called it the land of Canaan because there's Canaanites.
Yeah.
However, this is where Jehovah took Abraham and told him he was going to possess.
Yeah, that's true. I think he wanted Abraham and the Israelites to clean up the Canaanites. That's
And
probably
it's,
what he was.
yeah, sure, but it said that there were Canaanites in the land. It didn't
Yeah,
say it was the land of Canaanite, land of Canaan. So
right.
they added that wording, or they worded it that way so that it makes it sound like that's where all the Canaanites are, but that's not where all the Canaanites are. There was Canaanites there, and then it says there's what was it, Persivites or something like that there as well. But it
Right.
says they're there. It doesn't say it's their land. That's what I'm trying to.
No,
But then
right.
when you read how it's worded, it says the land of Canaan. But they just took some liberty with that, I think, because how could it be the land of Canaan if it's given to Abraham? That means it's the land of Abraham. It doesn't mean it's the land of Canaan.
I don't know who it was before it belonged to Abraham. We've always been taught it was the land of the Philistines or
Well,
the
there you go.
Canaanites. So
Except that if you look at where it actually is, it's down in Saudi Arabia by Mount Sinai. So do
mhm,
we call that the land of Canaan? You see what I'm saying? They're
mhm,
using place names based on this wrong location where they're placing the mountain, or
right,
where they're saying Abraham actually went. Let's just put it that way.
right,
They're saying he went into the Sinai Peninsula, and then he looped around and went south, and then came back up by the Suez Canal, and then back into Egypt. That's how everybody's presenting it, but that's not what happened.
yeah, I
Now that
understand.
we know where Mount Sinai is, that's what I'm saying. That's not what happened. He went
Right,
over to the Holy Mountain, which is over there in Sinai Peninsula. Now we know where he went. And then
mm,
he went east of that because if that's Bethel, which only makes perfect sense, that's where Jacob laid his head and saw the vision, that just makes sense that he did that at Mount Sinai, or what we call Mount Sinai. Let's just put it that way. All right.
mhm,
So I'm just saying, once you look at it from what we know now, what we were told before is not correct. And the places he went are not correct. And if you correct the places where he really went and then relook at this again, you get a whole new vision. And now it fits what it actually says. He went back and then he went south, which he would have done if he had to go over the south, the north part of the Gulf of Aqaba to go back to Bethel where his altar was. There you
Mm-hmm.
go. You see what my logic is? I'm saying.
Oh yeah, yeah, I see it.
Yeah. Okay. And if that land was given to Abraham just because there were Canaanites and Perizzites there, it doesn't make it the land of Canaan. It makes it the land of Abraham, that he had to drive other people out of his land. All right. So, at any rate, let's go on. So, the land was given to Abraham by God, which makes it his and gives him an unalienable right to own it from there on. That's where we get the idea of unalienable rights, because Yahovah is the one who's going to fight for Abraham, which we just saw him fighting, or acting, however you want to look at it, giving this plague to this king Pharaoh of Egypt. So that's where you see Yahovah fighting for Abraham. Now he's giving him this land, which means he's going to fight him and drive these people out of his land,
Mm-hmm.
because he doesn't expect Abraham to do it. But what we read in chapter 14 is that he sends Abraham goes out and he fights for Abraham, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why he gave him this tithe in chapter 14 to Melchizedek. You see where I'm leading to?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
power with God. That's where your source of unalienable rights come from. Your unalienable right is not that you're fighting for the right, it's
right.
that Christ blesses you and Christ fights as Christ the rock, which we all agree is in the New Testament, is written that way. That's Christ fighting for you. Christ giving you the right because he told you he was going to gave you a prophecy which gives you the right to the result of that prophecy. That's what I'm getting at. So we would call that an allodial title, which is the highest right of title
Mm-hmm.
to land. And that's where we got this idea of unalienable rights in our country. The caveat here in the USA is that you have to qualify for unalienable rights to own allodial title, own land by allodial title. And I just put your link here because we're not going to cover that. But in America, we call this de jure citizenship versus 14th Amendment citizenship, which is a citizenship created by our government.
Right,
Now,
right. I
that's where
understand
that
that one.
comes from. That's the source of unalienable rights.
Yeah.
And it starts right there. Okay, so Abraham's claim to all the prophecies or promises made to him by Christ are that Christ the shield, Christ the rock, Christ the scepter of Judah, etc., will enforce the contract for him or help him, however you want to look at it. And this
Mm-hmm.
goes on to his posterity because that's how it started. So there's
Right.
no guarantee better than that. It applies to his posterity, it's defined in Genesis. So the concept then of power of God is based on the fact that once Yahovah tells Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob, any of those, that he will give them land, then he will fulfill the prophecy unconditionally.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So
Yeah.
the prophecy was conditional until Genesis 23:16 through 18, when Yahovah swore by himself and reiterated the Genesis 12:1 through 3 prophecy, because that's what he did. So that's further proof then that he's making this unconditional and it's based on the original prophecy. That's the point. You go back and read it. So, plus he expanded the description of the Abrahamic covenant in chapter 23 to include, I will multiply thy seed or the posterity as the stars of heaven. That's your crown of 12 stars in Revelation chapter 12. He said, the sand of the sea, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. That's where he's talking about these Jacob's children there. Says, and then he reiterates, in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. All right, well, there's the source of the blessing. The people who obey my voice, right? People
Mm-hmm.
who follow the law, teach about Yahovah to their children, which is obeying his voice. That's exactly what he says in Revelation. So the logical error that everybody seems to make in reading this is thinking it means Abraham's posterity will be a blessing to other non-Israelite nations. All teachers make a mistake here. So, if you go back to number 40 in this document, the cross reference from Matthew 1:1, Christ the son of Abraham, also goes to Hebrews 2:16, which says, "But he took on him the seed of Abraham," which is another confirmation that 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 links back to Genesis 15:1 then, but the what it describes is in Hebrews chapter 1 through 8. So it's clearly about Christ being the high priest or Melchizedek, which is spelled differently. And that should be plain, which might people want to argue about that. I don't know. But this is the
Mhm.
same Melchizedek in Genesis 14, 19, and 20, who is the Lord speaking in Genesis 15:1, etc. So this high priest Melchizedek in Psalms 110:4 cross references back to the first part of Matthew 1:1. Now, if you're looking at this, Christ the son of David in Matthew 1:1, there'll be one of two cross references. It'll either cross reference to Psalms 110:4 in your Bible or a cross reference to Psalms 132:11, which then cross references to Psalms 110:4. Either way, Christ is the promised seed to Abraham, also in Hebrews, and to David in Matthew 1:1. One quotes this Melchizedek in Genesis 14, the other one quotes Melchizedek in Psalms 110.
Mm.
See?
Yep.
It ties them both together and back to Christ, the son of Abraham.
Right.
Either way you
Right.
look at it. So it's two separate prophecies because one's to David and one's Christ to Abraham. So it's really two separate prophecies. Once in Genesis 14, then in Psalms 110, 132, two spellings, one's Hebrew, one's Greek, same entity. Okay. Now, Acts 3:25 is saying Christ, which came from Abraham's posterity, is the one doing the blessing to the kindred nations of Abraham's children. We covered that last time. Matthew 1 through 17 also gives a genealogy which confirms Christ is born from Abraham, so that also confirms it. Then in Matthew 1:23, we have a quote which goes to Isaiah 7:14 about Emmanuel, in other words, Christ, the being born.
Mm.
And that cross references to many other verses in Isaiah about Christ, like chapter 11 and so forth, that confirms he's from Abraham and is their Redeemer in Isaiah, not for the whole world. Christ is the one doing the blessing then to Christian Israel nations in the correct context, not Israel nations blessing the nations of the world, although that can and should also be true. But
Okay.
it's just as easy for me to see that Christ orchestrated all of this, which only makes perfect sense because he's given the prophecy and then he fulfills it. In other words, it's his prophecies and he has to make them happen. So maybe Abraham didn't get the point about why he was at Mount Sinai. He didn't grasp the full import, possibly, but let's look at the result. He built an altar, called on Jehovah, did what he was told. When Jehovah commands you to do something, that's law. He doesn't ask, he commands. So we're not told if anything's being written down here. Just assume this is oral law. But they're trekking around in a very harsh environment, these 1,000 people, in other words, with a large number of people for where they're going and the distances that they're having to travel. So the end result was that Abraham was blessed and Lot as well because they had so many animals and so many things they had to split up and go different directions. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So that's the blessing, Christ blessing both of them, in other words. So plus Abraham inherits the land. So that's a blessing. Now he's a cattleman. He has these herders and he can go into the banking system with his silver and gold. He's got so much of that. So it seemed good for them to split up, and there must be a method to the madness because in Genesis 13:14, after Lot was gone, the next thing you see is that my Bible, King James, has a header that says God's covenant with Abraham, or Abram at that time, is renewed. Well, he really hasn't told Abraham a whole lot so far, it doesn't appear, but he's traveled through a land which certain scholars we relied on in the past have tried to identify for us based on this false idea that Mount Sinai was in the Sinai Peninsula. So,
Mm.
the problem then is with our charts and maps they provided for our Bibles so far is that they're wrong. Okay. They've all had Mount Sinai in the wrong place. So, where was he exactly in chapter 13 if we use today's reckoning? That's the question.
How would how this is basis for something applied in Revelation? I assume you'll tie that in at some point.
Yes, the whole point that you have to show these two witnesses, their empires based on chapter 14,
Mm-hmm.
48 of Genesis, that those prophecies in chapter 48, you back up. They came from 37:9. Before that, they came from 35:11. Before that, they can't. You see, they just go backwards, and they go
Mm-hmm.
right back to, well, we can say chapter 18. We're at 18 now, so we can easily show they go back to 18, which goes back to 15, which goes back to chapter 12. You see, it's all
Mm-hmm.
one story. But up
Okay.
here, then this posterity, in other words, he's promising this land down here. Then he's promising that they go to his posterity and that Abraham, that Isaac, in other words, will have the same covenant. The same thing he promised to Abraham is passed to Isaac. Then the same thing is passed to Isaac, is passed to Jacob, where we exclude Esau. Then we're promising, as you recall, back here in 1513, then this posterity to Abraham is promised to be brought out, which is the next chapter, Exodus.
Mm. Okay.
You see, it's all one story. There's no disconnection here. Everything we're looking at is going to go right up to chapter 48, right into Exodus, and then it's going to continue all the way through the Bible to Revelation. However, we're not going to do all that, but we really do need to go to Exodus chapter 19.
Mm-hmm.
We or 20, whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to go that far and connect the dots so that no one can say that there's that then these people here in Exodus 19:6, these kings and priests, that's the first thing mentioned in Revelation. Okay?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kindred, kings and priests. 1, 6, and 7 of Revelation. That's who it's talking about. That absolutely ties to Exodus 19:6.
That ties into Revelation 1 too.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, and then when we get to Revelation, we've already shown some of the all of the backwards. I don't really need to go through that again. We've already kind of covered that. That's where
Mm-hmm.
we started. Was that
Right.
chapter
Yeah.
15 really comes from 14, which really comes from 7, which comes from 5, 9, and 10, which comes from chapter 1. Now, we can fill in some blanks or whatever with the churches and all that, but I don't think we really need to. Everybody's taught that uh, forward and backwards, you know. Well, what we got to show is that these people up here, which are the two witnesses, is a prophecy from Genesis chapter 48. That's what everybody wants to show. You can't just do it immediately. I mean, you could do it superficially,
Right.
but you still got to show that it's a prophecy that's passed on, and that they have this Christ, the rock is passed on, Christ the shield is passed on, the Lion of Judah, the King of salvation, all this is passed on, you see. And it's Melchizedek, it's passed on. And it only
Mm-hmm.
applies to the two witnesses. It doesn't apply to the whole world, which is the way every pastor is teaching it. It's
Mm-hmm.
wrong. And when you do that, it takes Christ the Redeemer away from Abraham.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Now we're showing that Christ the Redeemer is who's telling Abraham to go from here to here, and who's doing the whole dance here in Genesis is all being orchestrated by Christ the shield, which is also mentioned as Christ the stone in 49:24, and Christ the scepter of Judah in 49:10, which is the most used cross reference in the New Testament if you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point.
Okay. Good work.
But no one's really laid it out this way. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, that's why I think we need to put it in a readable form.
Oh, I agree, and we went way too far today, but we covered what I had laid out, so
That's fine.
I'll have something
Yeah.
new for next week.
Well, yeah. I'm sure once we get it put out in a book form, you're going to have to do some editing or looking and changing of things. We
All
may
right, well
mess up.
let's end the show, Pastor, because we're way over.
Okay.
All
All
right,
right.
let me close it out. Thank everybody for watching. We'll be
Yeah.
back next Friday.